welcome to another adventure here on my channel and to one of my favorite videos every year, my palette ranking. Now this video was even harder than in years past because I truly love every single one of these eyeshadow palettes. These are all super good. Honestly, pretty much all of them except like the very last place felt like a top 10 palette to me, and that's because about 2 months ago I did a really big declutter and I got rid of like 15 eyeshadow palettes, and then about a week ago I did another big declutter and I got rid of about 10 eyeshadow palettes that, even though I loved them, loving them wasn't enough. I had to use them too. I needed to be using them for them to earn their place in my collection. And then this morning, before ranking them, I even cleared out a couple more. So even if something is at the bottom of the pile, I still really love it. Otherwise, it would not have survived those recent declutters. I really tried to be harsh and only keep things I truly love. I did an experiment recently where I put away all but 15, and I'll link that video down below if you want to check it out and check out the results of it and like the 10 palettes I just decluttered recently, even though there are, like I said, a couple more that left this morning. But anyway, my point is, even if it is at the very end of the pack, even if it is one of the last place palettes, the fact that it is even still here is impressive. And like I said, they really did pretty much all feel like top 10 palettes except for one, and I'll explain that when I get to it. But with that, the only other thing I have to say before I go ahead and dive in is that I will obviously not be ranking my collab palette with Ccolor because, like, obviously this would be #1 and that's kind of boring. So this is obviously my favorite, but it's my baby. I am too biased to do that, but hopefully maybe in your palette ranking this might be #1, who knows. But anyway, I'm just gonna set that one aside and dive in to the 39 palettes besides mine in my collection. I'm very happy that this is under 40 palettes, even though I own more than 40 palettes. I'm really happy with this. I'm happy with this size collection. And I think with that, we can just go ahead and dive on in. So last place, and honestly the only palette that doesn't feel like a top 10 palette, is the Bay TECHNIDAZE palette. This palette I honestly almost decluttered this morning, but what stopped me is the fact that this really is an early summer palette for me. This is the type of palette I would reach for when it's starting to get too hot for me to want to spend all day outside, but because it's summer, late spring, I'm feeling colorful and I want to experiment and play with makeup inside and try something fun. This is the kind of palette I would reach for then, and I got this in late summer this summer. And I used it a couple times and then I put it away and I haven't used it since. So I thought, hey, I'm not really using this. Maybe I should declutter it. But then I realized, since this is such a seasonal palette for me, maybe I shouldn't declutter it until I actually have it in the season where it makes sense for me to want to reach for it. So this was on the chopping block. It is in last place, but I'm going to keep it through summer this year and see if I use it. And if I don't, I'll declutter it. But it is super pretty. I love the Beauty Bay formula. And this is my only current Beauty Bay palette. So maybe it will survive, maybe it won't, but it is, for now, in 39th place. And then in spot 38, which I still love this palette, like there's a big jump in between 39 and 38, but it is, surprisingly, my Colourpop and Hocus Pocus Gather Round Sisters palette. And I think this was pretty high up last year, and it has been for a while now, but the truth is I just haven't reached for this in a long time. And even though this is kind of a fall palette, so I want to expect myself to reach for it in like spring and summer, because I really do my makeup according to the seasons usually. This fall, I just didn't really reach for it either. And I think if this wasn't Hocus Pocus, I might have decluttered it by now. And I'm not 100% sure why, because I really love this color story. I think it's great for me, especially with how I've been experimenting with makeup recently and my taste has expanded. I feel like this would be a palette I would reach for, but I just haven't. But I'm not sure if it's just a mood thing, so I'm gonna keep it in my collection for now, but right now it is kind of in that second to last place, and I hope it bumps up again in the future, because this definitely has been a top 10 palette for me in the past, and I do love that it's Hocus Pocus. Like, that is my childhood, so it's staying for now. I do really love it. I just haven't been reaching for it recently, and that is why it is in last place. And then is the Colourpop Smoke Show. This is now Blow and Smoke, and this is so low. This is in place 37. Yeah, 37. Because it's just very specific. Like, when I need this, nothing else will do. but I only do silver smoky eyes so often, though this is a good companion palette, even though I don't really use companion palettes often. When I do, if I want a white or a silver or a black or a gray, like this is a great palette to have, and it adds a lot of flexibility to my collection because I can grab it and combine it with things. And I do like that I can do looks with this. Like if I want an all silver gray look, this is the palette I'm reaching for, but because it is so specific and limited, it is in this spot. And then number 36 is the Colourpop Rudolph palette. I know there is a ton of Colourpop at the bottom here, and I think it's just because they are so affordable, but I still like their quality, so I'm pretty comfortable buying like once in a while palettes from them. But I do have some higher ranked Colourpop palettes. I do still love Colourpop. But place 36 is my Rudolph and Colourpop palette. This is just because, again, this is a seasonal palette. I really only pull this out around Christmas time. I do keep it in the box because I think the box is so cute, and since I only use it around Christmas time and I actually store it in a different spot for most of the year, then the rest I'm okay keeping the box, even though I usually don't. But I really love this color story. I think it's super cute. It's very wintry. I really love this Misfit Toys shade that's kind of a silvery pink. It's really pretty. Overall, I like this, but because of the theming, I only really use this in December into early January until that holiday vibe wears off, and then I put it away again. I actually haven't pulled this palette out yet this year, but I just haven't really felt very Christmassy this year. I did last year, and I might again next year. I've been too busy to feel Christmassy, but I do really like this palette, and I'm glad I have a Christmas palette. Though in a few years when this one might go bad, which I've had some Colourpop palettes for a while, so I assume it'll take a while, I'll probably just declutter it and not buy another Christmas themed palette. But for now, I am happy to have this, and it is really cute. But then the 35th palette is, I'm sorry, it's another Colourpop. It is the Kathleen Light's So Jaded palette. I love this palette. I think it's beautiful. Like I said, I love all of these palettes. I haven't been reaching for this. And I reached for it fairly recently, and I really enjoyed it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna start reaching for this again. And I just haven't. I don't know what it is, because literally every time I open this, I see a million different looks. I just, for some reason, when I am over looking at my collection in the morning and figuring out what I want to reach for, it's very, very rarely this palette. So that's why it fell where it did. I would like to use it more. I really love it. I enjoy it. And in fact, there's one that's, I think, kind of similar to this palette that ranks a lot higher. Maybe that's why I don't reach for this as much. Maybe that's the reason. But I still really like it, so it stayed in my collection. It just is kind of far down the ranking. And in 34th place, I decided to put my two Colourpop quads. I decided to rank these together because they just feel like they go together. I don't really think of them very different. I really like these for a, I don't know what I want to do today, but I want it to look pretty type of look. Like I want to do eyeshadow, but I don't know what I want to do, so let me reach for those. But I have a couple other palettes like that I do tend to reach for first. So with these, I feel like it's because I need to know, oh, I'm in a mood for cool tones or I'm in a mood for really warm tones, that these just kind of fall down the ranking. They're kind of in last place behind those other two palettes that I grab when I'm not sure what I want to do, but the quality is excellent. I do really like the color stories. I'm very happy with the video I made with these, and I love my look every time I use them. I just tend to reach for other stuff first, but I do really like these, and I think if I go traveling again anytime soon, these will be strong contenders for being the eyeshadow I bring with me. And then I think that was 34, so 33, I think, is my Revolution X Tammi Carnival palette. This is my rainbow palette. This is my favorite rainbow palette. I actually decluttered every other rainbow palette I have, which was just one, because I am just not a colorful eyeshadow person. I do enjoy it sometimes and I like playing with it, and there's definitely a spot in my collection for this palette. But again, it is a once in a while type thing. It's one that I'll reach for as like a companion palette, which does knock it down, even though I can get some beautiful looks from this. And this orange right here is still one of my favorite shimmers in my collection. Something about the tone of it just gets me. I think it's beautiful. I have a rainbow palette, and the shade that I love the most is arguably the only neutral. That's very me. But even though it is, in my opinion, the best rainbow palette ever, I stand by that. I still think it's the best. it still is a rainbow palette. So that's why it's so low. I still really love it, but it's a once in a while type thing. And then 32 is another colorful palette. Again, one of my once in a while things. It is the Unearthly Cosmetics Strawberry Milkshake palette. They've rebranded since then, so that's why it says Alien Cosmetics, but they are Unearthly now. This is like my perfect curated colorful palette, but it is still a really colorful palette, and that's why I don't reach for this as much as if it had at least a couple neutrals in it so I could kind of tone down a look, because there is nothing to tone down a look with in this palette. It's gonna be bright, it's gonna be vibrant, and if I want that, this is the palette I go for. But because I only want that sometimes, this is pretty far down. Though I do love this formula. This is one of my favorite formulas, and that's why it beat out the Tammi palette and why it is a little bit higher than some of these other once in a while palettes, just because the Unearthly Cosmetics formula is top tier, one of my favorites. I would love to get another one of their palettes that is more neutral, but I just haven't so far. They just haven't come out with the right one for me yet, but they are a killer brand and they're definitely one that I keep my eyes on. So next is the 31st palette, and I was kind of surprised this one ended up so low, but then again, it also just feels right. It is my Kaleidos Sci-Fi Futurism palette, or Futurism 1 Sci-Fi Green palette. I love this palette. I think it is absolutely beautiful. Kaleidos, again, is just one of my favorite formulas. It is so freaking good. The reason this one is so low is just because the color story is a little limiting. Like, I'm getting one of 3 or 4 looks out of this palette, which 3 or 4 good looks out of a good 6-pan, that's not bad, but it is just a little limiting. I don't reach for it all the time. And now that I do have a couple more green palettes that are just a little more flexible, I tend to reach for them more. But this formula is just, it's so good. If any of these sci-fi futurism palettes call out to you, I highly recommend them. I am still kind of sad that their Cyber Bronze palette is sold out and seems not to be coming back, because I really like that palette and I think I would use it a lot. And then number, I believe this is 30, is the Ccolor Neutrals palette. This is one that I can see really rising in the ranks next year. I haven't used this enough to, I feel, really get a full understanding of it. I don't think this is Ccolor's usual formula. I think it's a little bit different, and I don't necessarily think it's bad or worse than their usual. It's just, it's different. I've only used it a handful of times, so I can't really rank it any higher than this, but I do really like the color story. I love these glitters, even though Ccolor's glitter formula isn't my favorite, because I feel like I have to use a glitter glue with it, but these glitters are just so pretty that I don't even care. I do like it, but I just need more time with it to feel fully secure on my thoughts on it and to rank it any higher. And now number 29, the BH Cosmetics OO's Dance Remix palette. Again, BH is one of my favorite formulas. I think they are just so good. Like, they are genuinely so good. I have several BH palettes and 29 is the lowest, and the reason is I just don't use this one as much as other palettes. Something about the color story just doesn't call out to me as much. I'm not sure what it is, because it is a fairly neutral palette and it has both warm and cool tones, but it's just not a palette I reach for all the time, so that's why it's so low, but the quality is impeccable, and I do really enjoy the looks I get from this palette when I reach for it. I just, again, kind of have to be in a certain mood to reach for this palette. But there are some really pretty, like, darker shimmers in here, and since I've been getting more into that, again, this might rise in the rankings. Again, everything just feels like a top 10 palette, so saying this is 29 feels like, what am I talking about? It's so good, but I don't use this as much as other things in my collection, even if I love them just as much. And then 28 is the Nomad Fêtes de Provence palette. And this again, I could see this rising in the rankings. I think this is so low because, again, I got this near the end of summer. So I did a couple looks with it, and then I was ready for more fall, more grungy looks. So I kind of put it away and haven't really wanted to reach for it in a while. But I am very excited to play with this in the spring, in the summer, when this is more what I'm feeling, more what I'm going for. I have recently discovered I love my Nomad palettes a lot more than I thought, and the other two are definitely higher in the rankings, so I love Nomad. It's just, I haven't felt like I fully played with this palette enough, and I haven't really wanted to yet, but again, I know that's seasonal. It's just my preference right now. So that's why it's not any higher, but it's still a good palette, and I am excited to want to play with it in the future. Next is number 27, the BH Citrine palette. This palette is so pretty. I love my yellows, browns, neutrals. Like, this is just so good. I love this glitter. This pressed glitter is gorgeous. It's like a duochrome yellow green. It even has some like purple in there, multi-chrome glitter. I love it. I think this is a great little palette. It does have some flexibility with like, I can do an all neutral look. I can do a neutral look with a pop of yellow. I can do an all yellow look. Like, it just offers a lot in a tiny package. Though I do have another BH Birthstone palette, and it is obviously higher in the ranking because you haven't seen it yet, but that one's like all neutral, so it's a little bit higher, but I do really like this palette, and I think the quality is just so good. And then number 26 is my ABH Norvina Volume 4 palette. And again, this is just because I haven't reached for this recently. Again, I think this is more of a spring, summer, maybe late winter type of palette. It's just more pastels, more bright pops. Again, I need to be in a mood to really want to play with makeup and do something vibrant, which hasn't been my mood lately. But when it is, I do like this palette. I like this formula more than the normal ABH palette. I think I got rid of all of my like normal ABH palettes. Yeah, because I decluttered the Carly Bible a while ago, so this is my only ABH palette, and I'm okay with that because of some of their antics recently. But I do love this formula. I love this color story. This palette has stopped me from buying a lot of like neutrals with pops of pink type of palettes since I've gotten it. So it was definitely a good thing to add to my collection, and I do really enjoy it. I just, again, haven't quite been in the mood for it recently, and that's why it's so low. And here we go, number 25, the Colourpop Good as Gold palette. This is the palette I used to do Emmy's look. I think it's really pretty. I love golds and yellows, gold tone neutrals in makeup. It's something I go for a lot. I just like other things more. Like, I don't know how to explain why this is here. I love the quality. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it feels like it should be in my top 10, but something had to be lower. But like, I would never want to declutter this palette unless it goes bad. It's a great palette. I love it. It is almost an exact dupe of Naked Honey, I believe. I've seen them swatch next to each other, and they are super similar. So if you like this color story, maybe check out Naked Honey, since unfortunately this has been discontinued. But it is a beautiful palette. I'm very glad to have it in my collection. And then 24 is Colourpop Mandalorian The Child palette. And the only reason this is so low is because I have another green palette that I reach for first when I think, oh, I want to do a green look. So since I tend to use that one more, this one kind of got bumped down. But I love greens, I love neutrals, I love the duochromes in here, I love the theming. I love the theming. One of my best friends got me this for Christmas, and that makes it special. So again, it just feels weird that it's so low, that it's 24, but it's a beautiful palette and I love it. And when the other palette I reach for, which is very high up, you'll see, doesn't have quite the green tone I'm going for, this is what I grab instead. And like, look how cute the packaging is. It's so cute. And then number 23 is the Shadow Kiss palette by Ultra Ego. This is a dupe of, I believe, the Natasha Denona Glam palette, but it's just a beautiful, cool tone neutral palette. And if I want cool tone neutrals, this is the palette I grab. This palette has stopped me from buying a lot of other cool tone neutral palettes because I'm like, I already own this one, I already love this one, it's great quality, I have no problems with this. Maybe I would have liked a couple more mattes over shimmers, but still overall, it's just a really well done cool tone neutral palette. I like the packaging. I think it has this really nice soft touch cardboard. I just really like it. Again, the only reason it's so low is because I liked other stuff more, even though, again, I feel like this should be a top 10 palette. And then 22 is the I Heart Revolution Rosé Fizz palette. This was another gift from a friend, and she saw it and thought of me and bought it for me, even though she didn't know I was like super lusting after it at the time. So I was very grateful, and I love this palette so much. It is my mixed metals palette. I love mixed metals together. I think it's so pretty. So every time I see a mixed metals palette and I want it, I get this back out to remind myself I already have this. I really like Revolution's quality. I think it's really good, even though I do think they have improved their formula since this palette. I still really like it. I think it's super cute in this chocolate bar packaging. Does it smell like chocolate? It does kind of have a chocolatey smell. It's just a great palette. Again, so low because something had to be. 21 is the BH Pearl palette, just because this is such a good little warm neutral palette. I love this shade as both a lid shade and a face highlight. This glitter, gorgeous. Sometimes I pull out this palette just for the pressed glitter. As a neutral lover, this is something I reach for a lot of the time, and I'm not gonna say it stopped me from buying other warm neutral palettes because I'm basic and I love those, but it's definitely been a good one that has served me since it's joined my collection. And like, it's BH, so it's super affordable and the quality you're getting is genuinely outstanding. And here we go into the top 20. Next is the Colourpop All That palette. This was a moment for me. This was the palette that genuinely got me really interested into Colourpop palettes. I think I'd tried like one before and it hadn't been a good color story for me because I got it from a BoxyCharm or something. But when this came out and this joined my collection, this is where I fell in love with Colourpop. And clearly I have a ton of Colourpop palettes, even though they've been kind of low, but I have some that are higher too. I love my Colourpop palettes, and I think this offers me so much. I love red eyeshadow. I love that I can do a more neutrally red look or a more vibrant red look. Oh my gosh, I've had this for years now, since I remember wearing it at my job that I had before COVID, so before 2020, and I wore it constantly. I don't wear it quite as much anymore just because, one, I no longer have the job where my uniform matched this color story perfectly, and two, you know, it just kind of isn't the hot new thing, so it's kind of more on rotation in my collection, but it's so good. I still think this is the best packaging Colourpop has ever done, and even if this goes bad, like, my friend can make a palette into a Z palette. I think I might even have her do that with this packaging for me just because it's so pretty. I love this palette so much. And again, it's 20. How is a palette this good? Number 20. But moving along, 21 is my Ccolor The Frost palette. This, again, it's just such a good palette, such a fun color story. It has so many beautiful options. I love every single look I've done with this. This yellow shimmer right here is the shimmer that got me into yellow shimmers, and I actually asked Ccolor to put it in my palette, like, don't change anything, like, that is Vegas Lights, because it is so good. So, like, if I'm stealing shades from my own palette, you know it's a good palette. You know it's a good palette. This was really the palette that got me into Ccolor, so maybe it's a little sentimental in that aspect, but I love this palette. Even though I think Ccolor's formula has improved since this palette, this is still really good. It is my, well, now second favorite Ccolor palette, but still my favorite if you don't count my own. Moving on to number 18 is a fairly new palette to my collection, the Revolution Ultimate Lights palette. I had to put this so high simply because this is the best Revolution formula I've ever tried. The mattes are good, they're the same usual Revolution formula, but these shimmers are just insane. They don't seem like Revolution shimmers, you know? They seem so much more shiny, so creamy, so wet looking, and they wear beautifully on the lid all day. I don't find that they crease any more than like a regular eyeshadow on me. They're just so pretty, so good. This is a very me color story, but because of that formula, I just had to bump it up in the rankings because I think they really did something amazing with this palette. 17 is my BH Cosmetics 90s Dance Remix palette. This, again, just the quality, absolutely impeccable. The reason this is so low is, again, because it's pastels and I'm just not in a pastel mood recently, but this is just so gorgeous. I love all the frosty shimmers. The mattes are great. I love this row of neutrals because if I don't want to go colorful, I don't have to, or I can mix colors with the neutrals. I can do a bunch of monochromatic kind of pastel frosty looks. It's so good. Like I said, the only reason it's so low is because something had to be, and this really does feel like a top 10 palette. I think it was last year. I just really think it's because it's winter, and if I had done this ranking in summer, it probably would have been higher, but this is how I feel today, and today's the day I'm ranking my palettes. Now, number 16 is the Colourpop Star Wars palette. This is just gorgeous. I love Star Wars. It gets points for that, but the color story is stunning. It's so fun. You can do an all colorful look with the blues and the reds, or you can do something more neutral. This shade Hyperdrive is a really, really beautiful duochrome. I really feel like the only reason this is so low is because I haven't given it the love it deserves. Like, every time I see this, I'm like, I need to play with that palette more. But I'm genuinely really excited to play with this palette more. I went on a trip very soon after getting this palette, so when I got home, it wasn't like the new thing in my collection, and I just haven't quite gotten back to it yet. But I'm very excited to, because I genuinely think this is such a pretty color story, not even being Star Wars. Like, I love that it's Star Wars, but if it wasn't Star Wars, I still would have bought the palette because it's It's so good. And again, it kind of has that mixed metals thing going for it with the gold and the silver. It's so good. It's so good. And I do believe this is currently in stock on Colourpop's website, so if you've been having your eye on it, I do recommend it. And then number 15, and actually this and the Star Wars palette traded places. I originally had this coming palette as 16 and Star Wars as 15, but I was like, no, this palette has to be in my top 15 just because of how much I use it. And that is the Viseart Lettres d'Amour Paris palette. One, I love the Viseart formula. I think this is probably one of my favorite formulas as well. It definitely is. It's so good. But I reach for this palette when I just don't know what to do. When I'm like, I want to wear eyeshadow. I don't know if I want it to be neutral, colorful, warm tone, cool toned. I have no idea. I grab this palette because I know I'm going to get a pretty look out of it. I can do something more colorful with this purple or more likely this green. I can do something really neutral. I can do something all matte. I can use these very pretty shimmers. The last time I used this palette, I did a really pretty look with this silver kind of gunmetal shimmer, which I think is just kind of an unexpected element to this palette. I'm sorry if the video just kind of shifted slightly. My memory card was full, so I don't remember what I was saying about this palette, but this is number 15. I love it. It is so low because I just have so many lovely palettes, that's why. Now number 14 is my Nomad Whistler Snow Lodge palette. It is a pleasure to use. I always love the look I get out of this palette. There's this really cool duochrome shade that's like blue and purple, and look, any palette that can make me excited to use blues, it gets some points for that. It's such a lovely winter palette. It really is. I kind of realized recently how much I love this palette. I was thinking it was kind of the, like, I don't know, just maybe it just kind of took up space in my collection and maybe I didn't really love it. But like I said, recently I did this experiment where I put some palettes away and this one stayed out and I was really surprised it did, but I was also glad it did because I've used it again and I really do love this palette. This palette is ranked above so many palettes I love for me because I do genuinely love it. So I think it's just a great color story. It's a good formula. It's so cute, pretty to use. The experience is nice. Obviously, it's more of a winter palette for me since I do like to do my eyeshadow with the seasons, but it just overall is a very solid palette. And number 13 is my last Nomad palette, the Hudson Valley palette. This is the perfect fall palette. It is gorgeous. I love the warm tones with the cool tones. I do wish maybe there was another shimmer, but still. I actually got rid of a couple other like fall palettes because of this palette because I felt like if I want the ultimate fall palette, this is the one I'm going for over those. So why do I even own those? Fall makeup is the one seasonal thing that I'll use all year because I don't know if you could tell by everything about me, but I'm very much a basic bitch when it comes to fall. Like, it is my thing. So this one does have to outrank this one a little bit, but I just really enjoy both of these palettes. And now number 12 is relatively new to my collection, but it is the Tarte Glamour palette. This actually comes in a set with another palette, but my friend and I split the set and I got the cool tone one, and this is just such a nice palette. Tarte really did something with this formula. These mattes are super blendable. These shimmers are so creamy, so sparkly, but not so much. They're not like so over the top that I'm like, ooh, I can't wear that on the everyday. It has these beautiful greens. It has a bunch of neutrals. It's just a really, really well done cool tone palette, and I can see this very much becoming one of those palettes like this that I reach for when I just don't really know what I want to do, but I want pretty eyeshadow. And I also am just really glad to have Tarte back in my collection because I feel like this was the brand that when I first got into makeup and I really couldn't afford expensive makeup, like I was strictly drugstore. Whenever I went to Sephora just to torture myself, I always went to the Tarte stand, I swatched around. I really wanted to someday have a lot of Tarte in my collection, and I don't, but it is kind of nice to have a Tarte palette that I love so much that makes me go, hey, there's a reason I like that brand. Past me would have been really happy to have that. And I mean, current me is really happy to have it too. And now number 11, just barely missing the top 10, and it really fought for that spot. Like number 10 and number 11, super, super close. But I had to make a decision, and number 11 is the Colourpop Whatever palette. I love this palette. This again is just one of those perfect fall palettes, and it just has been for years. I've loved this for so long. I love that pressed glitter. I love this orange in particular, one of my favorite shimmers in my collection. This Super Shock is really nice. The mattes are nice. The packaging is super cute. Again, Again, I think if this goes bad, because I can't picture myself actually decluttering this, I think this will be another one of those palettes that I hit up my friend and be like, hey, turn this into a Z palette for me, will you? Because it's so pretty. Just overall, I love this palette. I wanted it for like a year before I bought it, and I kind of wish I had just bought it when I originally wanted it, because it has been one of my favorites since I got it. And I'm kind of surprised it is number 11. Like, I'm surprised it's not top 10, but again, when so many things feel like top 10, something has to be bumped out, but this just barely missed it. And the reason is because number 10 is the Sigma Warm Wishes eyeshadow palette. This is a warm neutral palette. This I also feel like is a warm neutral palette just with some pops. But the reason this one is just because I love the Sigma formula. This formula is immaculate. This is one of my favorite formulas. I know I've said that for a lot of formulas, but there's a lot of really top tier formulas, and this is one of them. So because of the formula, this one did get bumped down to 11, but this really fought for it, man. Especially this shimmer flicker. It's just so beautiful. It looks like metal on your eyes. The mattes are so blendable and creamy, but they're pigmented. I love this palette, and you know I love the formula because as soon as I tried this, I was like, let me take a look at Sigma's other palettes because maybe I need one. I did not need to do that. I have not bought another one, but maybe the Cinderella palette has made its way onto my Christmas list, maybe. But this is just such a good little 6-pan where I feel like I can get so many looks. I don't feel like it's limiting. It's just so beautiful, and that formula is just killer. And then number 9, I feel like everyone else who owns this palette would rank this palette so much lower, but I don't care. It is the Naked Cyber palette. I love this palette. This is my special shade palette. I know a lot of people thought this was kind of lackluster, not really there, not really something that could compete with those indie brand duochrome special shade palettes. But I'm not someone who likes super intense shimmers. I like something a little more toned down. I feel like recently I've kind of been creeping into trying a little more intense shimmers and enjoying them. But this really is my special shade palette. I don't really use this on its own because I just don't really love the mattes they included, and I felt like I wish they wouldn't have included any mattes and just let it be all shimmer special shades. But this is so good that I think of it as a companion palette, and it is still in my top 10. I cannot gush about it enough. Honestly, the ones that actually made it into the top 10, when all of them feel like top 10, you know these are some special palettes to me. So number 8 is, I believe, yes, this is my highest ranked Colourpop palette. It is the Grandeur palette. I wish they still had this because it's so good. It's such a good neutral palette with a twist. It just has a little bit of green to it. It has one of these green and brown like duochromes. It has this dark teal. It has this gorgeous glitter. I love a pressed glitter, what can I say? It's not too warm, it's not too cool, it's a real neutral palette. And again, if I want to wear eyeshadow but I don't know what I want to do and I just want a pretty look, this is one of the palettes I reach for. Because like every look I've done has just been so pretty, so elegant. I love the packaging, the names, it is the best neutral palette they've ever come out with. They come out with so many neutral palettes, but this calibration was just perfection. And now, number 7, I never thought this brand would be in my top 10, the Pat McGrath Bridgerton 2 palette. I tried 2 of her mothership palettes, and while I liked one, I thought the brand was overall too inconsistent. The mattes really weren't that good to justify the price, and I didn't really care for the formulas in those palettes. Even the special shades really didn't feel that special to me. So I actually decluttered my Pat McGrath palette and never thought I'd buy another one, but I lusted after this one for so long, and then I finally watched Bridgerton. Literally, I watched Bridgerton because of this palette, and I loved it. So I was like, okay, I cave, and I got this palette. I'm so glad I did because I had heard it was a different formula from the motherships, and I agree. I think this one is much better. These mattes blend so well. This matte is a little sheer, but apparently it's supposed to be. And these shades actually are really special, really pretty. This shade in particular, what's it called? Forever Charmed is my favorite single pan of eyeshadow in my collection. It has this weird gold type of sheen to it, but if you blend it out, let me see if I can do this. It has like a green base. I don't know if you can see it, but it has a green base to it, so you can do this beautiful one and done eyeshadow look, just packing it all over the lid and blending it out into the crease, and it is It's so gorgeous. And my favorite look that I did this year was this shade all over the lid, blended out into the crease with this dark brown from the Grandeur palette on the outer third and a little bit of this pressed glitter just tapped over the top. It was beautiful. I'll put up a picture. It is stunning. And honestly, this is the shade that bumped this palette up into the top 10. Though I also love this shade right here. It's like a baked formula and it's just so glitzy and shiny without being too much. It is just right on that line where it feels beautiful, but it's just not so impactful that I feel like, oh, I can't wear this every day. So I think this formula is probably my favorite Pat McGrath formula, even though I like this shade better. I also love that it's Bridgerton because now I love Bridgerton and this is a real treasure in my collection. Number 6, just barely being knocked out of the top 5, is another luxury palette, the Natasha Denona Retro palette. This was a Christmas gift last year from my best friend and it's just so good. It is fabulous. The formulas are wonderful. The shade choice. I love my pinky neutrals. It's just such a good palette. Like, I don't really know even how to describe to you what's so great about this palette because the answer is like everything. It's just an all-around really, really great palette. So, and now the top 5. In 5th place is one that has been decluttered several times and has zombied its way back every time. And I just need to admit it's because I love it so much. It is the BH Doja Cat Mega Palette. Again, BH's formula is fabulous, though I don't think this is quite as good a formula as the 90s Dance Remix. I think the mattes are, but I think the shimmers in this are a little better. But like, I'm the girl that I'm not really after super intense shimmers anyway, so I'm fine with that. And overall, I think this is just a really pretty palette. The color story is just gorgeous. I love that you get like a matching matte and shimmer, each of these little duos. I love the pastels. I love the jewel tones. I love that there's enough neutrals that I can reach for this when I want to do a neutral look. I love the greens in this corner. Super pretty. I just really like this palette. And actually, 2 of the palettes that I got rid of this morning were my Huda Beauty pastel palettes because I realized this has very similar pastels and I'm more likely to reach for this. This is the one that I kind of think of as sort of similar to the Kathleen Lights So Jaded, but I just reach for this more. And every time I reach for this, I always think, man, I want to reach for that tomorrow too, because I just thought of another look I could do with that. So yeah, this is my 5th favorite palette in my collection. It offers me so much variety and a lot of things I really enjoy in makeup. Pastels, neutrals, some fun greens, BH's formula, it's just really good. And then number 4 is my Juvia's Place The Coffee Shop palette because I am so basic at heart and I just love brown eyeshadow. I genuinely love brown eyeshadow. I get so excited over a really pretty all brown look and this is my all brown palette. I was after the perfect all brown palette for months and Juvia's Place finally came out with this and I was like, that is it. It is such a beautiful exploration of the color brown in makeup. It goes super light, super dark, cool tones, warm tones. It's not too big. Everything really does have a place in this palette. Even the shades that look kind of similar in the pan, on the eye, they really do look different. They go in different directions. It's coffee shop themed, one of my favorite themes in makeup. I really love this palette. I've used it so much since I've gotten it and I can't see that slowing down anytime soon. I really think this is going to be one of my most used palettes in the next year because I love brown eyeshadow. I go for neutrals like the majority of the time and I just get excited every time I reach for this. And then number 3, beating out even these beautiful, beautiful palettes, the Odin's Eye and Angelica Nyquist Hella palette. This is my green palette. When I want green eyeshadow, this is the palette I go for. It has such interesting, beautiful greens. I also love pinks. It gives me that. These duochromes, really pretty. I was kind of disappointed in the formula when I originally got this because I thought this would be like this formula. I thought this would be like Kaleidos' formula. I thought it would be one of my top tier A+++ formulas, and it's not, but it's still a really good formula. I just feel like my expectations were a little too high and that's why it was disappointing because I've continued to use this so much. This is probably one of my most used palettes in my collection this year. The color story, the theming, the collaborator, such a great palette. I'm so glad to have it in my collection and it is my 3rd place palette. And then my 2nd place palette is, I would say probably, yeah, I'd say this is currently the most used palette in my collection since I decluttered my Soph Extra Spice, and that is the Revolution Roxi Cozy Vibes palette. I can't stop using this. Usually in summer I will stop for a little bit, but every time it gets kind of chilly, I pull this back out. It really is a great transitioning into spring palette because it is so light and I can do kind of not quite pastel, but more light looks. I love bright shimmers, light mattes. It's this pinky neutral palette. It has some really pretty oranges as well. This Harvest is such a good shimmer. I love me an orange shimmer, if you couldn't tell throughout this video. I keep pointing them out as some of my favorite shimmers. Blanket is really pretty, candlelit. It has a couple pressed glitters in it for me to play with. I just love this palette, and I have ever since I've gotten it, and it has been one that I constantly reach for. It just feels so luxurious to me. I love this knit print. Since I've actually gotten into knitting, I love the packaging even more. It's like textured, it's nice. I love this palette, and I have for years at this point, and I am so glad I have this in my collection. Genuinely, it is so, so good. If you are also a really fair girl who likes really light tone shimmers, because I feel like they're kind of hard to find in palettes that have more than one of them, you know? And this one just has several. And then number one. Usually this would be my Soph Extra Spice, and if it hadn't gone bad this year, it would still be my Soph Extra Spice. But since that palette went off and I decluttered it, I had to pick a new favorite. And I really thought about this, and I kind of thought, no, that palette's too new. I can't make that my number one. But I just kept coming back to it, and I was like, if I'm being honest with myself, this is my number one right now. And it is the Pat McGrath Labs Mothership Mega Celestial Nirvana palette. I got this as a Christmas gift from my mom. It is what I'm wearing today, and I just have not stopped using it since I've gotten it. I love this. I love this palette. I really do feel like color story wise, it is the big sister to Soph Extra Spice, with the neutrals, cool tones, and warm tones all in one palette. Some neutrals, some pops of color. They really do give me a similar experience, a similar vibe, even though one is literally Revolution and the other is literally Pat McGrath. I don't know, but I really like it. I like the formula. It's not my favorite formula ever, but I do like it a lot more than I like the Mothership palettes. I think it has some really pretty special shimmers without them being too intense, too much. It has a couple that I think are that same formula that I really liked in the Bridgerton palette that are just twinkly. That's a good word for it. They're twinkly. Then it has this shimmer, which is the one I'm wearing today, that again just looks like metal on the eye. It kind of feels like a cream to powder, this one does. It just has so many textures, so many beautiful colors. Again, a palette that makes me excited to play with blues, which I haven't yet, even though I literally have not put this palette down since I've gotten it. Seriously, every time I've gone to do my makeup and I've been like, what palette should I use today, Pat McGrath? I even went to a special occasion and I had a makeup look planned and I was like, never mind, I'm using the Pat McGrath palette. And it kind of feels like cheating that this is my newest palette, so I'm giving it number one. But the thing is, this is not my newest palette anymore. My friend decluttered some very exciting palettes to me, and I still haven't used them because I haven't been able to stop using this. So let me show you these other palettes that I have not used because of this. First is the Angelica Kaleidos Club Nebula palette. I've had this for days. I've done my makeup several times and I've not reached for this. She also gave me the Ace Beauté Violet Sage, which I really thought about buying myself. Very pretty, very exciting. Again, haven't reached for it. And then the Posh Cosmetics Cozy Cabin palette. This is absolutely stunning. These duochromes and multichromes look insane. So freaking beautiful, and yet have I reached for it? No, because I can't get over this Pat McGrath Labs Celestial Nirvana palette. It is just so good. It has my heart. It just has so much for me to play with. I can still think of so many looks I want to do with this. Looks I've already done that I want to do again, and I hardly ever redo looks. This really is my favorite, so it gets the number one spot. And if Soph Extra Spice taught me anything, it's that if I have a favorite, it is really, really hard to knock it down. Soph Extra Spice was my favorite for at least 3 years, maybe 4, at least 3, and the only reason it was knocked down is because it went bad. So good luck to every other palette beating this out for next year. And I kind of hope nothing does. I like having a solid favorite that is just my go-to over and over again for a long period of time, and I really do believe this is it. And I also wanted to go ahead and say that on my channel while this is still available, because since it is her holiday, it is limited edition. Though I do not recommend buying this full price because There are so many sales going on with this palette, and especially after Christmas, though hopefully this video will be up before Christmas, but especially after Christmas, this should be on sale, so do not pay full price. But I do think on sale, it would be worth it. Like, Sephora has it on sale right now, Pat McGrath has it on sale right now, and for the sale price, I do really love it. I do think it's so good. This is also the palette Taylor Swift was wearing in the Bejeweled music video. Fun fact, I definitely want to recreate that look with this palette. There's so many pretty things in this palette. I love it. I love it so much. It is my number one. I'm gonna go ahead and stop gushing. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments, what is your number one favorite palette? 39. And I absolutely adore them all, as it should be. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. But yeah, I can't believe a Pat McGrath palette made it to my number one either. I'm kind of shocked. She also gave me the Blend Bunny Noctilescent highlighter palette, and I can see why she decluttered this. It is so chunky on the cheeks. I even put like a more smooth highlighter over it to try to disguise it, and it does not look good. I'm not really enjoying this. I'm grateful to try it, but do not recommend unless you like a very chunky highlighter. You know what? I think it is time to end that experiment and pull them all out, because they really are just so good. I really love all